Picture this. A 14-year-old is at a birthday party. There's music, there's food, there's a table full of people who supposedly care about each other. And every single one of them is staring at a screen. Not posting about the party, not even texting someone, just scrolling, waiting, hoping that somewhere in that endless feed, something will finally feel like enough. It never does. Now here's the question nobody wants to ask out loud. Did they choose this, or were they never given a choice? Because what we're watching happen to Generation Z isn't laziness, it isn't stupidity, it isn't moral failure. It is something far more precise, far more clinical, and far more urgent. And if you have a Gen Z kid, or are one, you need to hear what's actually going on inside that brain. Let's start with the neuroscience, because this is where most conversations about Gen Z get it completely wrong. Every human brain runs on a reward system governed by dopamine, the chemical of anticipation, craving, and pursuit. For most of human history, dopamine was released in response to real effort. Hunting, building, solving, connecting face to face. Then, someone handed a 5-year-old a smartphone, and the entire reward architecture of the developing brain got hijacked. Here's what that looks like neurologically. Every swipe on a phone is a variable reward mechanism, the exact same psychological structure as a slot machine. You don't know if the next post will be boring or fascinating. That uncertainty supercharges dopamine release. The brain doesn't just enjoy it, it becomes dependent on it. Psychologists call this intermittent reinforcement, and it is, clinically speaking, the most powerful behavioral conditioning loop ever discovered. Gen Z didn't develop this problem, they were born into it. By the time they were 3 or 4 years old, they watched every adult in their life staring at glowing rectangles, disconnecting from the room, flinching at every notification like it was a fire alarm. Children learn by mirroring, always have. They looked at the most admired, most powerful people in their world, parents, older siblings, teachers, and saw one consistent behavior. The phone always wins. So they waited, they watched, and the moment they got their own device, they did exactly what every child does with a new power. They used it. Now here's where it gets darker and more important. It wasn't just the scrolling that rewired them. It was what the scrolling showed them. Social media handed an entire generation a mirror, except the mirror was broken. It only reflected the filtered, curated, highlight reel versions of other people's lives. Perfect skin, perfect trips, perfect friendships, perfect bodies, perfect coffee in perfect hands, wearing perfect shoes. Nobody posts their worst Tuesday. Nobody posts the fight with their mom, the failed test, the night they cried and didn't know why. So here is what a developing adolescent brain concludes, not consciously but neurologically, repeatedly, thousands of times per day. Everyone else's life is working. Mine isn't. Something is wrong with me. Psychologists call this social comparison dysregulation. And in a brain that's still literally under construction, the prefrontal cortex, the seat of identity and long-term reasoning, doesn't fully develop until age 25. This kind of constant comparative exposure is not just discouraging, it is structurally damaging. Now add the trend machine on top of that. Influencers with millions of followers became the new gods of a generation that had no stable cultural ground. Not teachers, not books, not elders. Influencers. And the message those gods broadcast hour after hour was brutally clear. Wear this, drink this, use this, look like this. The Jordans, the Stanley Cup, the Adidas, the Monster Zero. One wrong brand and you're not just uncool, you're target. The result? A generation that performs identity instead of building one. That attends events not to experience them but to document them. Who show up, take the photo and leave because the photo was always the point. They don't live in the moment, They live in the highly filtered, permanently archived, algorithmically judged performance of the moment. And the cost of that performance? Their nervous systems never learned to rest. Their attention never learned to sustain. Their identity never learned to form from the inside out. Let's be specific about what chronic screen exposure does to a brain that's still developing. The anterior cingulate cortex, responsible for attention regulation and emotional processing, requires sustained, low-stimulation focus to develop properly. Boredom in developmental psychology is not a problem. It is the condition under which creativity, patience, and internal motivation are born. A brain that is never bored never builds those pathways. The hippocampus, the seat of memory consolidation and learning, requires sleep, repetition, and active recall to encode information. When learning becomes "just Google it" or "the AI will write it," the hippocampus gets bypassed. Information passes through without leaving a mark. They didn't choose to stop learning. The architecture of the system they were handed made learning feel pointless. Why struggle to understand something when the answer is 3 taps away? The tragedy isn't that they're lazy. The tragedy is that struggle is where the brain grows. And they were robbed of the productive struggle before they were old enough to know what was being taken. Here's the part that no one wants to say out loud. We did this. Generation X, millennials, parents, schools, tech companies that designed compulsion loops and called them features. Platforms that knew that their products were damaging teenage mental health and chose engagement metrics over children's well-being. We handed them the device. We modeled the addiction. We built the world they were raised inside. And then we called them lazy. Gen Z is not a failed generation. They are a generation that was handed an unsolvable problem at an age when they had no tools to solve it. And they are doing their best inside a system specifically designed to keep them stuck. The question now isn't what's wrong with them. The question is, what are we willing to change? Because pointing at a generation we raised, in a world we built, using tools we normalized and calling them broken? That's not honesty. That's deflection. If you see yourself in this, or your kid, leave a comment below. What do you think was the turning point? When did it shift? Because this conversation doesn't end here. It starts here. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Not to blame, to understand. Because understanding is always where change begins. Subscribe for psychology content that asks the uncomfortable questions. Because the truth, even when it stings, is still the only way through.